my loves. This is Shannon Easterly, licensed clinical marriage and family therapist. I have, over the last few months, talked a few times about grief, big grief, little grief, all kinds of grief, and this has been a time of grief for a lot of us. And today, I want to talk about the antithesis of grief, which is joy. Mostly, I just like to use the word antithesis because it makes me feel really erudite, which is another word that makes me feel really smart. Anyway, I want to talk about joy and the importance of joy. So, why is joy important? Well, we are wired for danger. We are wired to notice threat. We are wired to be heightenedly aware of the tiger on the ground, maybe not so aware of the birdsong in the trees. The challenge is that we have an evolutionary mismatch. Our world has evolved much more quickly than our brain has evolved. And so, because our brains don't really know the difference between an encroaching deadline and a tiger, if we are not cultivating joy, because we're not wired for that naturally to really stand out for us, we stay in a place of perpetual hypervigilance, because we live in a world right now that is perpetually in a place of moving quickly, lots of stress, lots of stuff going on. So without joy, without purposefully cultivating that in our life, we stay in our sympathetic nervous system. So we have like one foot on the brake and one foot on the gas, just waiting for whatever is going to happen. Especially in this last year or so with the pandemic, we've had this invisible enemy that we're just like waiting to see when it's going to strike. And so lots of us have felt that way. That's also why a lot of people are feeling so incredibly tired right now. I feel like I have had so many clients and people even outside this room who have talked about how they would expect to feel so much more energy at this point, and instead they're just completely exhausted. And we talk about how we spent a really long time in a place of hypervigilance, whether we recognized it or not. And so when you have run and run and run and run, you don't cross the finish line and go, oh, that was refreshing, I think I'll, run some more. We cross the finish line and we kind of collapse, and that's where we are right now. So if we are not cultivating joy, we stay in a place of being revved up, of consistently anticipating threat, because we don't live like we lived when our brains were first developed, where there is a threat, it presents itself, it passes, it goes on. Now, what our brains perceive as threat are chronic and constant. So, we must therefore really be mindful of cultivating joy, of really trying to identify it and magnify it to help balance out our brains being in a place of chronic hypervigilance. Sometimes we can get stuck thinking that it's not okay to feel joy if we are also feeling sadness or fear or anger or other emotions. Emotions are not mutually exclusive. I can, recognize that I am a work in progress while also feeling really good about the progress I've made. It is okay for me to feel joy while I am at the same time feeling grief. It doesn't take away from one feeling to have another feeling. So it's okay for us to cultivate joy even when there are difficult things going on. And in fact, it's important for us to. That's what balances us out. It's what allows us to move through the difficult things more quickly, and in a way that allows us to get back to our, what we think of as our normal functioning in a timely manner. So I have notes because I still have grief fog. So I'm gonna go through some examples of things that give me joy, in the hopes that they will help be a springboard for you to begin thinking about the things that give you joy. And then at the end, I'll talk again about why it's so important to begin thinking about this and to begin really noticing it and just amplifying it. When I was doing some somatic experience training, and I'm going to completely butcher this, but there was an author that they talked about who she was, I think she was wheelchair bound, and her caregiver was much, much younger than she was. And they ended up falling in love and getting married. And every day he would take her out to the garden and they would sit and sense. They would just sit and be aware of all of the nature around them. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, that is absolutely lovely. And all of you extroverts out there are like, what are you talking about? But that is one of the things that brings me the greatest joy. I will sit, especially at dusk, and as it's beginning to get dark, and sometimes I even close my eyes, so I guess it doesn't matter what time of day it is, and I will just listen to see how many different sounds I can hear, how many different kinds of bird song, crickets, frogs, how many different kinds of vehicles on the highway miles away that I can barely hear, planes in the sky, a train far away, and just notice. And that brings me joy. A good bath, getting to be in my feminine energy, that brings me joy. The face of a pet brings me joy. Laughter is like the best catch-22, because joy brings laughter and laughter brings joy. Smiling at someone, it is amazing how much people light up when we smile. I feel like it's, I'm pretty sure I was born with a smile on my face, and probably 20 minutes late, according to my mom. But when you smile at someone, oftentimes there's this like startled, surprised look on their face, and then lo and behold, they smile back. And that is incredibly joyful to me. What else? A good cup of coffee, or a good coffee cup. Otters holding hands. Did you know that otters hold hands so they don't drift out to sea when they sleep? Oh my gosh. And I think that's just such a beautiful allegory for differentiated relationships. And we will each be in our own dreams, and we will stay connected. Oh, joyful. Prayer. Dancing in the kitchen, singing, and then just silly things like my daughter and I took a road trip, and in the last little bit of it, after we had been driving for quite a while, we decided we were drunk on tired, and then we just started laughing about the idea of being drunk on tired, which is really funny because she's 12 and she doesn't really even know what that means, but she knows what it means. Being aware of joy allows you to experience more joy because you recognize it when you're in it. So think about those moments, and they can be tiny little moments, but the more you think about them, the more you will begin to notice them, and the more you begin to notice them, the more of those moments you will have, and the more joy you cultivate, the more you inoculate yourself against grief and despair and depression. And life is a whole lot more fun when you're experiencing joy. So I would just encourage you to maybe even write down your list of those things that bring you joy. And maybe they're not sitting and sensing. Maybe they're being in, a crowd of 1,010,000 people listening to a rock concert. And hopefully there will be a time when that feels really safe and fun again for you, if that's the case. But write those things down. And do you know that we can put ourselves in those moments, even if we're not in those moments? And you can notice the sensations in your body even when you put yourself in those moments. So I don't have to be looking at a picture of otters holding hands to feel that warmth in my chest. I can just imagine it. And then the more you feel those good, pleasant, warm, loving sensations, the more you let those magnify, the more times you find yourself in that energy. So find your joy and let it strengthen. I hope this has been helpful. Take care.